I should start by saying that we want to acknowledge First Nations peoples and acknowledge their connection to community, culture, and country. And with that, I want to warmly welcome Priscilla Harvey, the author behind Living the Questions on Substack, someone who doesn't have a highly visible online profile, but if you tune into her work, if you dig into some of the last pieces that she's written on Substack, she's talking about some highly relevant, very important, pressing issues, and does so with such a, I think there's, what would you say? There's a feminine touch, there's a sensitivity that you bring to it. You've talked a lot about personal anecdotes with your daughter, and it's a treasured voice that we have on Substack. So with that, I welcome you.
I'm so pleased to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me and reading my work and getting the word out there. I'm really honored that you asked me to be on here.
For sure. And let's just talk. Maybe we can just jump in with a quotation of yours. And this is from Why I Call Myself a Christian, which is a piece, I think that was my entry piece to your work. I don't know how the algorithm somehow just connected us somehow. And I really connected with that piece. And I'll just read this quote. When I read Living Buddha, Living Christ by Thich Nhat Hanh, I expected to feel affirmed, and I did. But I also found something unexpected, a gentle challenge to stop skipping across spiritual traditions and return to the place I started. That quotation really jumped out at me. And there's a lot of different layers to that. So maybe we could just begin by, offering you a chance to help us understand where are you coming from with this quotation?
I love that you picked that quotation. I became very disillusioned with Christianity. I'm from the South in America, was raised in the church, and it was a very big part of my life. And then it started not answering all the questions I had, and things didn't start lining up for me. So I started exploring other spiritual faiths and traditions. And in college, I really connected with Buddhism, and it just made a lot of sense. And I think I did. I just kind of skipped across, and I would try to locate myself and the valuable pieces I could find in each tradition, trying to find a connection to something greater than myself. But when I read his book, it really struck a chord. And Thich Nhat Hanh is one of my favorite teachers, and I have listened to him for a long time. And I thought there is really a rich tradition and rich teachings in Christianity. And when I started having children too, there aren't Buddhist community centers in my town, and I wanted to worship with a community. So that was part of it too, is, well, can I find my way back into this faith? And there's a lot of patriarchy, and there is a lot of hijacking of what Christianity is today by people in power. So I had to kind of fight through that and remember what was beautiful about the faith, and spend time with the faith and reading the actual Bible and the words of Jesus, and doing what Thich Nhat Hanh advised me to do, and finding the people in my faith that struggled and found deep truths that resonated with me. And so that's kind of where I ended up back calling myself a Christian, kind of not in spite of, but almost trying to reclaim Jesus's teachings and saying you can be a Christian and not be a Christian nationalist. But it was a hard walk for me to get there, because there was a part of me that was like, no, I don't want any part of that. And there's such a, if you call yourself this, that means you see the world in these eyes, especially a Southern Christian. And I was like, no, I don't want to give the loudest people in the room the power over a faith that I think is beautiful. And then I thought a lot about people that are in the faith that need the softer voices to land when they start questioning more the fundamentalist view and the Roman Empire view and the view that man has taken of these words and changed what I think the intent was.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there.
And I'm sorry if that was too long of an answer.
That's great. That's great. And I'm just thinking, because the distinction, I mean, even just on a sort of technicality, helping maybe some international listeners understand the distinction that you raised between the sort of Southern Christian versus, I guess, a more mainstream generalist Christian in the US. How would you characterize that as someone from the South?
So there is, and I'm brushing with broad strokes here,
yep,
but the South is called the Bible Belt in the United States. And it is typically much more fundamentalist, much more rules. There is black and there is white, and there is not a gray area. And the Bible is a set of rules that you are to follow. Now, they pick the rules you're supposed to follow. There is less spirituality to it and more rule following, typically in the South. And being a Christian in the South is also much more part of the Southern culture. It's you can't drive down 2 or 3 streets and you'll see 4 Christian churches. I mean, they're just everywhere. So I'm trying to think about how to say, that there's an idea that you go to church more regularly, you're more insular, and it defines more of who you are in the South, typically, if you consider yourself a Christian. So it is a different, it's much more conservative and less liberal, typically.
It's harder to separate faith with the culture of being Southern. Is that fair? Yes. And so I go to a downtown Episcopal church, and we have a much more liberal, open view. And our church encourages questioning and encourages pushback. That is not often the case in the South. And so our church also, we get a lot of people that were raised very fundamentalist, and they are not ready to let go of their belief in God and Jesus, but they're ready to let go of the church and have been harmed by it. And that's something I've struggled. Do I stay in this institution that has created harm for people? But if I don't stay, who's there for them when they show up and say, I still want to believe. I still think there's good in this book, but I've been harmed by the way I've been taught about it. There's, we have, and to just even be more like, I know I'm talking vaguely, but like, there's we have a lot of gay members that come and just say, I was taught that my choices were an abomination, and our church doesn't hold that position. You are all loved by God, welcome. And so for them to come and have been raised and surrounded by stained glass and still be welcomed is a beautiful thing, to see them find a home in a place that felt like home for them for a long time, but then harmed them significantly. And then you also mentioned this phrase, Christian nationalist, right? And in reference to some of the internal struggle that you've undergone. And again, just building on that a little bit, thinking that, do you feel somehow let down, by the leadership in terms of their appeasement? They're willing to sort of play nice with some of these sort of more strident nationalist type ideas that merge Christianity with, in some cases, pretty far right stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, and I do think the denominations are very different. I've struggled with the Catholic Church for a long time because I just think it's absurd they don't allow women in leadership. But I am really enthused about this new Pope and see some good things coming from him, but the capitulation to the Trump regime by the Baptists and this fundamentalist Christian voting bloc is so problematic to me. And it is kind of the antithesis of all of Jesus's teachings. He said, you welcome the refugee, you embrace and you do not judge, and you love one another as yourself, and you look at yourself and try to remove the fault of your own eye. And his whole premise was love, and somehow the Christian nationalists have usurped that and taken it as this form of a way to judge and point fingers and separate. And that I grew up, Jesus was a white guy, and it wasn't till I got older I was like, he wasn't even white. Jesus I've always looked at had blonde hair and blue eyes. That's not even historically accurate. And it was so part of the culture here. Like, I'm still untangling the lies I was told, and and separating what is, and we won't know it all, but like the Gnostic Gospels have opened up this whole new avenue in Christianity. And there are people who don't accept that, and that's fine. But I think they have a lot to teach us, and just looking at all of it with a discerning eye and reading the Bible from your heart and hearing those teachings, much to Thich Nhat Hanh's point, has shown my faith to take me deeper and closer to God, which is what I have always been seeking. And I do not believe that when I call myself a Christian, I do not believe that that is the only way. And there are a lot of Christians that think, well, that means you think you have to believe in Jesus. That's a very Southern thing. You have to believe in Jesus. And if you don't believe in Jesus, you're not a Christian, and everyone else is going to hell, which is just absurd to me. But that was what I was raised to believe. My son was at camp this summer, and he does not know what he thinks right now. He doesn't know if he believes in God. And we are a household that is very open with that. He goes to church on Sunday. He acolytes. He goes to the youth group. But we are allowing him to question and wonder. And we talk about it. And so anyway, he was at camp, and these kids asked him, they were like, do you believe in God? And he was like, I don't know. And they were like, oh my gosh, you're going to hell. And he just kind of came home crying. He was like, am I going to? And I was like, no, honey, no, and he was like, well, I quickly realized those were not my people. And I said, that's right. Those are not your people. But that is in the water here still. And so sometimes, you ask yourself, do you stay in a faith that is part of and fight for what your truth is, or do you leave? And those are questions that I think each person has to answer individually. I have found for now it's more important to stay in and find the good within. And I have found such great people to read and thought leaders like Richard Rohr and Cynthia Bourgeault. And, there's just so much there and that's being unpacked. And I think a lot more spirituality is being discovered in the Christian faith by people who've chosen to stay.
Well, I think that's why you're also such a important voice right at this moment, precisely because you are not afraid to voice some of your uncertainty. And you are telling me, which to me, someone that is, I'm Buddhist agnostic-ish with lots of different family connections to different religions. For me, I'm inherently skeptical to people who jump to certainty, right? That's just how I'm wired. That's sort of my own life experience. So when you are able to say, no, I'm Christian, And I'm also going to be vocal about some of my own struggles and how I've wrestled with certain things. That's a voice that we need.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's right. And I am like you. If someone is certain of something, it really turns me off. And that's, to me, that faith by its definition means we don't know. Why would you need faith if you know? It's kind of taking a leap and saying this world is magical and mysterious and painful and awful and all the things. And we're just these little humans trying to figure it out. And so to think that you have the corner market on knowing, I think you block out what is in front of you teaching you something every day, because so for me, living in faith means living in the question mark, living in the I don't know, and being open to what happens. And I've just picked a lane to dig my hole, which is Christianity, because I feel like the deeper I go and the more I spend with this one space, the closer I get to whatever it is I'm searching for, instead of skipping along. I mean, to Thich Nhat Hanh's, to bring it back to his point, I think there's a lot to that. I know a lot of people that they jump around. They're like, well, I just pick what feels good for the moment. But I think that's also a problem, because sometimes what is needed is the struggle. The struggle is what creates a lot of the beauty. I mean, as anyone who's gotten sober knows, like if quitting drinking were easy, more people would do it. It was a struggle. But that's so much of where you find who you are, and living in this world is a struggle. Some days, you have to learn to deal with discomfort and feel that. And I could not do that for a long time. And so to live in this world without an escape of alcohol or drugs or anything, my faith is very important to me, because otherwise I can get really pessimistic, and just, but my faith in this benevolent being holding this world together gives me hope, and it helps me show up, and it helps me love the world, and it connects me to love, and it connects me to other people. So
Just want to go back a little bit, because there's a lot in what you're saying about faith and the default position being not knowing and wishing to learn more to fill some gaps. And, it's not necessarily, faith isn't sort of a destination. It's a bit cliche, but I guess in a sense it's a journey, and it's the struggle, as you talk about. But I've just wanted to follow up, like, in terms of the scripture, right? Like, isn't blasphemy, if you're to encounter someone who doesn't accept Jesus Christ as their savior, isn't that very fact, in a sense, like the worst blasphemy that someone could commit?
So I don't look at it that way. I don't think God sent Jesus to die for our sins. I think humanity did that. We had a person named Jesus who came, who was a son of God, and he preached this radical form of love, and it scared the Romans, and it scared empire to such a degree that people crucified him. And I think that is hard to handle, to say God's son, I am God's daughter, you are God's son, that came to the earth and was clearly an enlightened being and had some connection, that, he was an enlightened teacher and master. And we, as a people, decided to kill him. That's hard to hold. That is really hard to hold. But it's easier to wrap it up with a little bow and tell your children, God sent him to die for our sins. But what sense does that make? I don't see God as like this. Why would he need to die? Why would an all-powerful God, but what Jesus did was show us a way to live. And what he did was surrender his life to the will of God, and he didn't fight it. So when the people wanted to crucify him, he allowed that to happen. And so for me, when I see the crucifixion, what it tells me is that is Jesus telling me, you surrender to life, you surrender to God, you try to love the best you can. And like what? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Those were his words. Like, so that to me is this: every moment I can choose to surrender to what is showing up. And that does not mean I'm not active and politically involved. And a surrender does not mean this, to me, like I'm just navel gazing and loving and everybody will figure it out. What it does is it allows me to stop fighting what is real, what is happening, maybe get quiet, get in touch, and hopefully touch some wisdom, and then move forward from that. That's what I think Jesus was showing us. And I don't think the idea that he came to die for us and that we have to accept him as our savior, to me, that is not what makes a Christian a Christian. A Christian is someone who follows his teachings. And I believe in his teachings. I believe in radical love. I think love is the most powerful force in the world.
Another one of his teachings, and this goes into one of your big themes, is that you cannot serve both God and mammon, right? Mammon. And that seems like it's an extremely timely exaltation, right? That, if you look at the Christian right, I would struggle. I really struggle to see how they wrestle with that, right? How are you serving God and at the same time embracing not just sort of money-making transactions, sort of, deal making, but just a unbridled love of money. I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I struggle, from the outside, not living in the States, not being a Christian. How do people reconcile this in their minds? I mean, you must encounter a lot of people nowadays who are just sort of like, okay, we're 100% Christian. We're 100% God-fearing Christians. And we're also 100% take no prisoners, earn as much money, bank it, do this, earn interest, take all the fees, do this, no taxes. How do people reconcile that?
It's a great question. I think they're so focused on the saving part of Jesus. They don't listen to his sermons. They don't listen to the Sermon on the Mount. They don't follow it. Like, he's very clear that if you worship money, it creates disordered thinking. And you should not how do you worship God if money is the most important thing to you? You can't. Do I like money and nice things? Yes, I do. I don't think money in itself is the problem, but it is the worship of it. It is the hoarding of it. It is the belief this is mine and not yours. And, and capitalism and I don't even think people in America, and I think it's starting to come out. I do think that's one thing good that is happening, is people are starting to look at that and saying, we're really messed up here. I don't know that the right is seeing that, but there's a lot of us on the left saying, I don't think I realized how bad it was until this administration. And I'm like, how did we get here? And what is this country founded on? And how are we so okay with seeing people starve and the greatest thing you can do is cut taxes and cut programs, and we're not feeding kids, but by God, you're going to have 50 people out there marching in front of an abortion clinic. Don't give a woman a right to choose. We're going to force her to have a birth, but then we're not going to offer to help and feed her children. How do people, I don't know. I don't know if they just shut off a part of, I do think the American dream itself has just gotten distorted. And I think a lot of it is what's happening. I remember being young and watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous and just thinking, oh man, that'd be great to have a yacht. Isn't that not?
Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
I love that.
It, and I didn't see it as a problem. And now I look at it as a sickness. You know, when I saw the Bezos wedding, it didn't make me mad. It made me sad. I was like, this, like, how do we not as a country look at that and say, man, this guy's really sick to have this much and to see that many people in need. And he's building ships and tearing up bridges. And I mean, like, it just, and he's not paying his workers well. And everyone's on board for it in America. You know, celebrities are coming, you know, like it was just like it was a no. And celebrities that I was shocked showed up, you know, and I was like, couldn't they just RSVP? No, you know, because they're kind of rubber stamping this type of capitalism. They're rubber stamping this type of behavior by showing up. It blew my mind and it shocked me, and it made me, I think that's when I wrote that article on Mammon, because I was just like, how did we get here? That, you know, we're worshiping money to such a degree that we don't see the people in front of us in need. And I don't mean to suggest I'm at soup kitchens every day giving. I don't, but it's the worship of the money. And that best, I think it creates disordered thinking. You can't see it.
The analogy that I can't help but draw is just the gun fetishization. Whereas I think like the John Wayne lore, the sort of Alamo story, you know, these examples in American history, you know, the Marlboro Man with a 6-shooter, these type of stories on the frontier, in the range, French and Indian War, these are all, guns are, in a sense, they're like a tool. They're a feature of the frontier life. They're one thing among many, you know, that compose this lifestyle. But it was never about, you know, oh, this shiny thing, I got a new Glock and it's great. And it's this, and I have 10 more 9mm, and I have this, and I have this, and I have this. I think, to me, I look at it and I'm thinking a gun should be a burden. There's a lot of responsibilities that attach to a firearm. I look at it and I see people post these photos of, they have 100 weapons lined up, and it's sort of on show, and they're beautiful and everything like this. But at some point, did people miss the fact that they're also there? You know, it's a defensive thing, hopefully, right? You're not using them offensively. And they come with, there's a duty of care that should be associated with that firearm. No one talks about that. And maybe I would just offer that as just an analogy to say that we're now sort of divorced. It's all this consumption is so far out of whack that now even something like a firearm, which you should take with a level of conservative mindset, is now just something to, as you say, hoard.
Yeah. And it blows my mind that it'll be all your, you know, like, I'm a good gun-toting Christian. Who are you so afraid of? Like, what happened to turn the other cheek? Like, what it makes me, I think when people just start attaching to rules to find their higher power and they don't feel anything on the inside, I think it just creates some really weird stuff like this, you know, like these fears where we have to have all these guns for protection from what? There are so many verses about not fearing and trusting in the Lord, right? And yet it's the Branch Davidian, you know, there's these sects of Christianity and people that are believers and they just stockpile weapons. And it's like, what is that? And I don't know if it's just because they can't access or feel something, and so they attach to rules and fear and just, I don't know. I still haven't wrapped my head around how all of that happened, and people rationalize it and think that it's something to be proud of or collect. You know, why do people collect guns and massive amounts? What are, you know, what is that about? I can't make sense of it. I think fear.
Yeah, fear. So Priscilla, let me ask you, how has motherhood intersected your journey? How has it shaped or informed some of the spiritual contours, you know, that you know, things that you've mentioned, themes that you've wrestled with? How has motherhood intersected with that search?
How has it not intersected?
Yeah.
The first thing that I had to learn when my children were born, it's funny you talk about fear, and segue into this was perfect. When I had my first child, I was plagued with anxiety, and I realized that I knew how scary the world can be, and it's hard to hold that. The world is also beautiful and also scary, and I just got real anxious about something happening to me, because who would protect my child? And I had to kind of go through a whole other process of surrendering my child to the universe, like that. I can't live in fear of something happening, because then I am not in a space to love my child. I am anxious and nervous. And so and I was like, but I know how scary the world is, and I have to trust that there is enough love, and and surrender my fears to the care of God as I understand him. That I had to do that first. And from there, so much of the choices I make are about, how do I foster a loving environment for my child to thrive and become a productive member of this society? And so part of that is, for me, church, of bringing them and introducing them, and not by saying this is the only way, by saying we're going to talk about this so we can open up all sorts of questions. So you can struggle, and so you can look at it and figure out what you believe for yourself, because I do believe we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And if you cut that part off, some part of you feels dead. And I think that was my experience. The most alive I have ever felt is when I'm connected to whatever I call God, which I still can't define. But faith has become, and my husband was agnostic, borderline atheist when we married. And I was fine with that, because my faith is not so fragile that I have to have the person I'm with to adopt my faith. What I saw when I married my husband was one of the kindest men I've ever met. I saw his heart, and it was just one of compassion. However, when we had children, I was like, I want to raise my children in the church. And he was like, now, wait a minute. What? And so we, anyway, he has found his own way to the faith, and is now considers himself a Christian, which is a blessing. It's great. And so we have open discussions in our house about it, and he had his own path that got him there. But giving our children limited access to the internet, a safe neighborhood. We're very blessed that we were able to afford a safe neighborhood where they get to run around and play with kids. And so we can say, go outside and not worry. And I know not everyone has that opportunity. But we made sacrifices in order to be able to move into this neighborhood so that our kids could have that experience. We've kind of built a life around trying to give them an experience of the real world, and not what a lot of kids are getting, which is more of an experience of a virtual world, which is what I've seen a lot of. And I did not want that for my children. I don't know if that answers your question, or kind of went on.
It definitely does. Because again, I think I don't know, you could probably draw a larger theme, like in a sense, you're in the majority view. In another sense, you are very much a minority view amongst the prevailing sort of national Christian views, whereby they are, in a sense, it's almost hyper masculine what we're looking at right now. I mean, this is, if there's, if you look at the defense secretary, or sorry, the war secretary now, right? Hint, hint, right? We're, just dropping these hints, very subtly, right? But there's something almost cartoonish. It's larger than life, hyper masculine, right? Where his faith is something that can be boiled down to a sort of like bumper sticker almost. It's sort of, God is great. I'm Christian. I can do 1,000 push-ups. I'm better than everyone. We rock. You all suck. That's sort of his brand of thing. And I think I bring up the motherhood aspect of it because, there's something like very, kind of fundamentally, I don't know what you want to say without being like essentialist, but there's a mother feminine type of viewpoint that you're advancing that is a little bit, it's comfortable, right? Men are not as comfortable, voicing uncertainty, right? I mean, isn't that part of the thing? That's this why men are stupid in a way, is that we're trained. Maybe, I don't know if it's socialized or normalized, but uncertainty is weakness for most men. That's how most boys are brought up, right? And I just see it. It's like with I think we have kids probably roughly the same age. We try to steer him away from some of the more contact sports. And it's not necessarily because of the contact itself. It's that the culture of, yeah, coach, I'm fine, right? No, you actually took a pretty big hit and you're probably seeing stars, but he's now worried. He has to think of this other layer of, well, I'm going to look like a Nancy if I say to the coach, well, yeah, I could probably use a 5-minute break. So that's why I bring up the motherhood, because again, it's something that I think imbues into so much of your writing, and that's why I'm really just getting so much of a kick out of your Substack.
Oh, well, thank you. I do write about my kids some, and because I do feel so strongly that it is really important for this generation. I mean, they are inheriting a dumpster fire right now, and we need kids that are empathetic. We need kids that are kind, wise, and not so scattered that they don't know their left from the right, because they have so much information at their fingertips and it's coming in. And so I'm very protective, and I'm just now getting around to realizing I need to be more protective of my own attention. I've been so focused on theirs that recently it's come to my attention that I need to kind of disengage more than I have been. And it's hard because every day it's something new that is just like, I can't believe this is happening. But it's like, how do you live with that and being informed, but also live with what is in front of you and what is real? And I haven't figured that out. I'm trying to work on that, but constantly looking at what is happening in Washington rather than my neighbor across the street and making sure she's okay. Something about that does not feel right to me. Like I'm missing what is actually happening in the circle of my own life when I am too focused on what's happening in Washington. And the algorithms and the internet, and it's this addictive thing, and we're all caught up in it. And I've noticed it more and more. You go to stores, you go to waiting rooms, and everyone I've talked to in person is like, I'm so sick of my phone. I'm so sick of the information over. Like it's kind of this new thing that I feel like it's coming up everywhere, as we're all kind of having this awakening of, this is too much. Something went awry. And it's not helping us become wiser or more, like we thought we would be, this global connected world, it's amazing to me that I'm sitting here talking to you in Australia. I mean, what it can do is amazing. And yet we're more divided than we've ever been. And that's interesting to me. And how do you balance all that and figure out how to make it work for you, and how to be conscious about how you're using technology so that it is actually working for you instead of consuming you?
Well, your latest piece about the dumb phone experiment, I think, is great, right? Tell us a little bit about it. 30 days, and basically, aside from text, phone calls, and do you allow yourself any news or Facebook? No?
Yeah, I do. But it is on my computer, not my phone.
Okay.
And it is an intentional time I sit down. But I'm on day 2, and I've already seen, I was like, okay, ordered an alarm clock, because on day 1, my phone went off as my alarm clock, and I pulled up my email before I even realized it. And I was like, oh shoot, I'm not doing that. It was just this automatic. So making it more difficult. But our phones just make everything so easy. Even getting on my computer, I don't have I don't have everything set up. So I actually have to, go to Substack and bring it up. And it's just there's an extra layer of intentionality now that I have to go through. But it's also, I wanted to see like what happens when I have a little more quiet, and I think the hardest thing will be for me, except for this podcast I'm doing with you. I'm not going to listen to any podcasts for 30 days. And it's not that I think podcasts are bad, but I had gotten to where, I was listening to multiple podcasts. I love learning new stuff and I love trying to figure stuff out. And like, I told you, I'm open to things and I'm open to the mystery. So I'm always interested, but it's starting to come at a cost and it's too much, and it's like, I have to step back and really look at my attention and see what I want to bring in, because there's just so much interesting stuff out there. And at some point it's overwhelming and you're not even generating your own thoughts anymore, and if you don't have time for quiet, where does the creativity even come from? It's not even your own voice anymore at some point, which is why people start sounding alike. And, my son, it was disturbing to me. I told him that I was doing this and he was confused by it. And he's 11 and he was like, why would you do this for 30 days? And I said, I want to see what happens when I open up space. I was like, do you not notice how every adult has a phone with them all? He was like, yeah, that's why I don't think you can do it. Like it just seemed obvious that there's no way an adult could do this. It's not feasible. And I was like, that is his world he lives in. He grew up in that world, seeing that. It's mind-boggling to him that I could do this.
So he's not ready to tick the box for his religion, but he's ready to call his mom out.
I know about God, but he's certain I can't do this for 30 days.
He's like, Mom, no way. You'll be back on it in 3 days tops.
Yeah, that's right. And the other day, tonight, my daughter was like, wait, what are you doing? Because I had my phone out and I was like, I'm responding to a text. She was like, oh, just making sure you're not scrolling. I was like, there's no scrolling.
Not just scrolling my past calls, Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, 2024. Yeah, I made 20 calls in April.
Yeah. But in just these 2 days, I've seen a difference. I have talked to my mother. I've talked to my father. I've talked, like, when I usually would be listening to a podcast, I have been reaching out to a friend, reaching out to a loved one, checking on people. It's just, I had an experience at the doctor's office the other day and I would have missed it because I would have probably been listening to a podcast in the waiting room. But instead I was just sitting there and I sat down and I was like, well, what do I do now? I didn't bring a book because I allow books, and I didn't think about it. And so I just watched what was in front of me and I saw this lovely interaction with the staff and an older gentleman that was lost, and their kindness to show him grace when he got frustrated and was trying to blame them for him being lost, and how they gave him dignity and care was just beautiful. And when I went back to my eye doctor, I said, hey, I just want to tell you about something I witnessed, and your staff just handled it so well. And it was just she was like, thank you so much for sharing that, because we never hear the good stuff. And and I said, well, they were so impressive. If that was my father or me as I'm older, that is how I would want to be treated. I would have missed that. I'm certain I would have been listening to a podcast or lost in an email or, just whatever. But instead I was just sitting there and the world was unfolding in front of me and I saw beauty and kindness. And I think we miss that when we're looking at our phones.
Well, I read the piece, and I read some of the engagement on the piece. And one of the commenters he mentioned that, he's going to get a typewriter, and he craves the analog and wants to write some letters and send them to his friends. I'm just thinking to myself, I think there are a lot of people who almost fantasize about this, right? This idea of having some tactile environment. Our world is so dematerialized, right? Like everything is just an app. It's some sort of digital interface we don't have paper, we don't have texture, we don't touch things, we don't do this. And when you think about the religious traditions, a lot of the ceremonial stuff ties people to things, right? There's sounds and there's, you see the representation of the body of Christ and the blood, and they're physical things. We all know that there's, it's wine representing this and there's representations, but there's a physical association.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we've missed a lot of that, and we've forgotten the importance of ritual. I think a lot of people are very unmoored right now. And I think that's where we see a lot of the fear, and they're just messed up in the way they're prioritizing what is important. That's what, when money is up here, and I have been guilty myself of reading an article and being in the middle of an article or the news, and my kids are asking, I'm like, hold on, and it's just it's so addictive. I would say, I would use that word. It has the same quality of an addiction. And I have talked to my son about that, because he loves video games and he is very limited on what he is allowed to play. But I have talked to him about that addictive quality. And I'm like, do you feel that sense when I tell you your time is up? How you never say, okay, well, that was a good time. Thanks. That was a great, it's always like, just 5 more minutes, just 10 more minutes. I'm just right at the end.
It would have been like tearing you away from a bourbon 15 years ago.
Yes. Yeah. Just one more. I just need one more, and I'm like, that is addiction. And he's like, oh, and he can recognize it, like now. And so it's fascinating. Like, he knows what that quality and that sense is, and he understands it. And I said, that's what I'm trying to protect you from. But it is a real thing, and I think technology is so good at hitting those same, dopamine receptors. I mean, there's been studies about it, like a like is the equivalent of like a bump of cocaine to the brain. I mean, it's the studies coming out about it are alarming, but they feel true to me too. Like it was when I had I said, can't believe I'm telling you this. But after I wrote that article, I was like, I have the rest of the night, and then tomorrow it begins. And I listened to 2 last podcasts on twice the speed to jam them in real quick.
No, you did not.
I stayed up late scrolling and listening to the 2 podcasts, and I thought, oh my gosh, that is like something an addict would do, and I didn't even realize I was down. I was just like, oh, I did want to listen to these, and I won't be able to for 30 days. So let me just hurry up and listen to them. And I was like, kind of at one point saw myself outside of myself, and I was like, yeah, it's a good thing I'm doing this. I'm going to need the 30 days. We need a reset. We need to really look at what's happening here.
Well, I'm going to set my calendar to 28 days from now to see the after action report. I'm really eagerly anticipating that article. But speaking of addiction, and because it's the second thing that you mentioned in your bio, and you're very open about talking about it, I'm also a recovering alcoholic. September 25th, I actually celebrated 20 years. And my journey was, I actually had a friend who was going through the 12-step program. And you know what? I don't know. I've always been a little bit sort of, anti-institution in a way. And I said, you know what? I know I've got this problem, but I'm going to basically use you as a shadow sort of fill-in. And basically, I took the program with him in shadow, and he did it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. And then a week became a month, became a year. And now I look back and it's been 20 years since I've had a drink. So I applaud everyone who's, found their path. And there are other institutions, there's people who are using different methodologies, nowadays. Power to them. If you can find ways that are less than teetotal to get you through it, really, I applaud you. That never worked for me. I went through a very cold turkey process, and that's how I did it. But tell us a little bit about your journey, to sobriety.
Well, I also went to AA, but that was not my first choice. I was desperate to moderate because I just could not wrap my head around surviving in this world without a drink. And so I knew I needed to quit. And I had long since stopped drinking every day. I went through law school. I did very well. I was thriving in my career. And I was doing everything I could to moderate my drinking so that it did not disrupt my life. So I will tell you, when I started realizing I've got a problem, and I knew it because every time I did drink, I would black out, and I didn't quite know how I got home. And I knew, like, I can't control this thing once it's in my body. I don't have control, and I don't know why. And it made me feel so out of touch with who I was. Like, why can I say I want to quit and I can't? It made no, like I can set my mind to something and achieve it, but this I can't. And I couldn't understand it. And I kept trying for years, different ideas and concoctions and things. And it was enough to keep me from ever having a bottom that people could see. But that also made it difficult. Like, I had a therapist I went to, and I was frank with him. I was like, I think I have a problem with alcohol, and I can't stop drinking. And he said, well, go home and see if you can not drink for a week. So I locked myself inside my house. I refused to call any friends, and I white knuckled it through there. And I showed up and I said, I did it. And he was like, well, then you're not an alcoholic. See, you're just depressed and you're highly anxious. And so we'll get you on some antidepressants, some anti-anxiety. I mean, like, it was just, I felt like I was gaslit for a long time. There's a lot of people that when they finally show up at AA, they're like, I was the last one to know. Everybody was telling me I had an intervention. That was not my story. Nobody was telling me I had a problem. Mm. But I was hiding things, nobody was seeing me waking up in my own vomit because I had gone home and continued to drink, and nobody was seeing the tricks that I'd learned about taking Klonopin and then being able to have 2 drinks so I could pass out and show up for work, and, all of that. And my life became so small, and I was not suicidal, but I did not have a will to live anymore. I just was like, it's too hard. And so I had a friend call me, and I woke up the day after my 33rd birthday, and I woke up with a hangover. Nothing spectacular had happened. It was a brownout, I would say, not a blackout. I was like, how'd I get home? Oh God, I drove. I could have killed someone again. And I had a hangover, and I just thought, I can't wake up and never feel this way again. I can't do it. I don't know how I'm going to quit, but I have to quit. And it was either that afternoon or the next day, a friend called, and he said, hey, I have something to tell you. I've quit drinking, and I'm going to come in town. And when I'm there, I'm going to go to a meeting. And I did not immediately say, hey, I think I need to go. I hung up, and I thought, what a drama queen. Why does he need to go sit around with a bunch of people and talk about not drinking? Can he just not quit drinking like the rest of us? And I realized I had locked myself in my house. I also could not quit drinking. I had no plan in place. And I thought, wait, I think I need to go sit into a room full of strangers and talk about not drinking. AA turned out to be much more than that, but that's what I thought it was just people lamenting the fact that they couldn't drink anymore and finding community in that. I did not know it was a faith, like that it was so much more. But that is how I ended up going to my first meeting, was with a friend. And I think that was absolutely grace, because I was private and I don't like asking for help. And the thought of showing up into a room full of strangers, or worse yet, someone I knew, and saying, I have a problem and I need help, almost seemed worse than death. And so it was really following my friend through those doors that allowed me to finally get help. And I did not like AA when I first started. I did not have the moment of, oh, these are my people. I was really resentful about being there. I questioned whether I really was an alcoholic. But slowly I kept showing up because I had no other option. And I just started working with a sponsor and started working the steps, and my life started opening up. I had moments that I can only explain as miraculous that opened my heart and showed me everything that I was numbing myself to, and kept me going on wanting to live differently. But I had such a core sense of feeling unlovable because of the way I perceived events in my past that I had a lot of healing to do. And that was painful. And I didn't want to feel that, and I didn't know how to feel that because I started drinking at 15 to deal with the pain that I didn't want to feel. And so I really had no sense of how to feel discomfort. And now I know how to feel discomfort. I know how to handle it. But that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
So is there a parallel to that aspect of the story, to the larger story that we talked about with faith, in terms of this importance of the struggle,
Yeah. It's interesting. So I do remember when I was getting sober, it's funny because I'm such a person of faith now, but when I got there, I was kind of fighting everything. I'm kind of a contrarian in a lot of ways. And so I remember my sponsor saying, well, you have to pray every day on your knees. And I was like, on my knees, like I was offended by this. And I was like, I mean, what would God care? I think I will sit in a Buddhist posture and I will, and she's like, no, it needs to be on you. And I was like, and she's like, it's not about God. It's about you. Mm-hmm. It's about getting in the posture of sacred receptivity and saying, I need help. I don't have the answers. Your body is reminding your mind what you don't know yet, and it was just these people giving me such great advice and being so desperate that I was following their instructions. And my sponsor at the time, she had come in almost on death's door, and she prayed and just miraculously never wanted to drink again. And I was really bitter about that at first. I was like, well, why is God not answering my prayers? Because I want to drink every day. And I'm on my knees, and like, we're 2 months into the program and I'm a really miserable part. And my mom was like, are we sure this is the path for you? Because you seem worse now. Because I was mad. I had no way to really, find relief. Everything hurt. And it was not pleasant for me. It was hard. But I will tell you this, I look back at that as a gift, because my getting sober, I'm sorry, that is my dog itching down there with her collar. If you can hear that, that struggle has kept me sober, because there have been some times I've been 15 years sober now where, I have thought about drinking again, but I thought, I don't have another getting sober in me. I can't go through that again, and some of my friends who I came into the program with, who getting sober was pretty easy on, they were just like, I just quit wanting it. And that is some people's story. A lot of them went back out, gave it another shot, and so I don't know. I look at the struggle now as a gift, because I'm like, if I ever think about it, and it's been years since I have, but I'm just like, no, because I cannot go through another getting sober. It was a very difficult process for me. It did not come easy, and God was not showing me miracles left and right. It was about 3 months in before I had a spiritual experience that changed everything for me. But that 3 months sounds short, but it felt like lifetimes, of just pain that I had nothing and no skills and no ability to deal with. And that was a really hard place to be in.
That's so interesting about the easy come, easy go. That anecdote about, for some who find it easier to, sort of renounce previous habit, the chance of relapse, potentially is much higher.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I don't know what that is, but I had no way to see that then. I just thought, like, why are my prayers not being answered? Why is this working for everyone else? But that's why I do find that there's something powerful in struggle. And I think today in our world, we are so struggle free in so many ways. Like we have our phones and we have our, we have like written the struggle out, and we don't want the bumpy parts, but that is part of what makes life rich. And I don't like that. I'm always like, why do I have to have pain? But there is something in there. Like, would life be so precious without death? I don't think so. If we were just like there is something in the struggle. And I don't mean to demean people's struggle, because when you're in pain and it hurts, to say, well, I don't mean to say it lightly. It is painful and it is awful, but I believe the miracle of God, in my view, is that I don't think he inflicts any of the pain on us. I don't think he chooses it for us, but he makes something beautiful out of it, if you can tolerate it, And so I don't know why it was so hard on me to get sober, but the beauty of it is now it has kept, that struggle has kept me and sustained me in times of weakness.
And I think, there's a lot of problem drinking around, and it manifests in different ways. But I think for some people who are more casual drinkers, I don't think they quite, sometimes they don't, it's hard for them to understand. When you are a problem drinker, I mean, what you described, where sort of the real party starts when you leave the bar, that is something that for more casual people who imbibe, it's harder to understand. I mean, well, it's a social thing, go out with your friends and you do this and we do this. But for those of us who've struggled with alcohol, with substance, I think that there's a hidden side of it. And the intent is, my sense is that the social part is great when you get it, but the real intent when you have a substance problem is the substance, right? And you'll be just as happy to pursue it if there's no social agenda as part of that pursuit. So I think that admonition, that there's a humility right there, right? That you need to, and this goes back to another theme of yours, the empathy part, right? That people have aspects of their struggle that you have no idea about.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't that what we would call empathy? It's that there's an intersection between the empathy and the uncertainty. Like, we don't know certain things about this person, so therefore we should cut them a wider berth.
Yes.
And allow them some of that space. And if they say that this is a promise of thing, maybe we should just give them some of our trust and give them some, extra credence to what they're saying before we go and, well, really, you came here on a what? How did you fill out that form? Are you sure Guatemala? Why don't you just go back to Guatemala? What's this? Why are you coming here? What So those themes, I find this therapeutic for me to try to put some of these themes that you're talking about that are so relevant to so many of us, and try to draw some connections that are obviously there, but it's fun to configure them in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And your part about empathy is so on point, because, and that is something that was so important to me in the program, that I think the program of Alcoholics Anonymous does so well, is creating a much more empathetic human. And it is when you have to forgive other people, it makes it easier for you to forgive yourself. And when you forgive yourself, you can forgive other people. You cannot give what you do not have. And learning to cut yourself slack and give yourself grace is such an important part of the program. And I think that it creates more loving, empathetic people, which I think is a real bonus of that program. I know there are tons of critiques, and I have my own, but I think it's a beautiful design for living. And I'm so glad that I stumbled upon it, because it has really opened up my heart and allowed me to look at people from such a much more empathetic lens, because I was able to give that to myself first.
So what would you say is where do you want to take your Substack? Where do you want to take this growing readership? What is the journey that, and I am one of your readers. Where are we going as your readership? Where are you taking us?
Great question. I mean, I am just like, that's why I picked living the questions as I don't know, I'm kind of I don't have a set plan. I more meditate usually before I write, and I usually sit down, and it is inspiration and what appears in my life, and that I trust that that is what I'm supposed to share. So there is not some grand plan here. It is more being guided by God, spirit, what have you, is where I'm, kind of. So in some ways, I'm all over the place, you could argue. There are themes, and I think those themes all connect. But I also didn't want to, I have tried to be open about exploring different topics and seeing what resonates with readers, and then seeing what resonates with my spirit and what feels alive to me. I have a manuscript. I am shopping out an agent. So that is part of my plan. And one of the impetus for me to start Substack was to see, like, does my voice resonate with readers? Do I have something to say? And it seems like it has. I don't have a huge following, but I've been on there a year and 2 months and feel like I've found some readers and found some community. And I've received such lovely messages, private messages from people, that keeps me believing that my work is reaching people and matters, and hearing from you, so it helps me think that my efforts are worthwhile. I love writing, and it is a passion, but if it's not reaching anyone, I think there were better uses of my time. So it's very gratifying when somebody can take something from it and use it to help their life. And to, my goal is always to come from love, and always, to just, if I can make the world just a little bit better with a piece of my writing, provide someone some comfort or some understanding or a new way to think of something. That's always my goal.
So the manuscript will be nonfiction, something that wraps together, like in a sense, the Substack is kind of a preview for something that comes together in book length.
Not exactly. It's interesting. The Substack has kind of taken on a life of its own. When I started it, my intent was to write. My book is the current working title is Unlovable, but it is the story of my first 2 years of my sobriety and getting sober. And I thought that was kind of where I would stay, and it just kind of, my spirit led me to different places, and it has kind of become something more than what I thought. So at this point, I'm just kind of letting it lead me where it does. But I don't know, to your point, I felt, I started talking about Christianity, and I started, like, just everything that's happening in the world. It felt like there were certain themes, and that people needed to hear that, like, hey, there's some of us that don't look at it that way, and there's a place for you. And, so I've just been kind of trying to be open to whatever I feel moved to share. And that seems to be working right now. I don't know that that's the, I know everyone says you need a point and a brand. And I really, I have shied away from all of that advice, and tried to kind of be creative and let what I feel needs to come out. And so I try to kind of steer away from some of the, which may end up hurting me in terms of getting my book out there. I don't know, but I feel like it's the right thing to do. When I was shopping for some agents, they were like, well, you got to have an online presence. And that's really what pushed me to start my Substack. And they were like, it doesn't matter what, but, get on TikTok, get on Instagram. And that just, it didn't feel authentic or good to me. And so I reopened Substack after having looked at it before. And I was like, okay, maybe I could try this. This feels like something I could do that would be a way to, a good use of my time and to have some think pieces, because I love to read think pieces and different people's viewpoints, and not a hot take, or a little video. Like I wanted something a little more substantive to offer. And that's what Substack has given me. So
is it morally okay to want to share some of these drunken war stories? As people that have, gone through a struggle and come out on the other side of it, should we not really talk about that, or should we feel free to share, some vignettes of a past life?
I am a strong believer in sharing. But I think that's because when I wrote my book, I could not find a book that I was looking for when I was trying to get sober. But I was reading all sorts of memoirs. My first one was Carolyn Knapp's Drinking a Love Story, and Pete Hamill. And I was grasping, and they were lifelines to me, because I was trying to figure out, this was before I started the program, am I an alcoholic? What does that mean? How do I fix it? What do I do? And so those books were so, they've helped me not feel so alone. So if a drunken war story helps someone feel not alone, then I think I can share it. What is a bigger question is when it involves someone else. How do you do that and do that ethically? But I will say this too, in my book, the part of me drinking is a much smaller part, because what I also found when I was reading a lot of them is it was all about the drunken escapades. And I'm like, well, that I know. How do you get sober?
You don't want to make a book just of that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that was what I was more interested in. And then I was really interested in, they would wrap it up, like maybe they'd spend 3 months sober, or just like they, and then they're like, all right, I'm sober now, it's great. And I'm like, well, is that it? And so in my book, I spent a lot of time going through the first 2 years and all the struggle of getting there. And I think it also helps. My other reader in mind was not just me, like I saw myself on the couch wondering if I'm an alcoholic. So I write to her, the person that is trying to find faith, and I'm writing to her. And then also, I think to your point that you brought up earlier, is to a non-alcoholic or a non-problem drinker, it is so hard to understand. Specifically, it's hard to understand why you would relapse. If everything gets better, you get your kids back, or you get, but you start again. It's so hard. And so I don't relapse. There are a couple times I get close, and I really walk the reader through it, and how I work the steps, and because I think it helps go, oh, that's how that works. It's not like, I remember when I finally told my dad that I was an alcoholic, and he was like, I didn't even know you had a problem. I've never even seen you drunk. And I'm like, well, I was very good at hiding it. And he said, well, what can I do to help? And I said, well, I really wouldn't, I did not share with people for a long time. And I was like, I'd like you to keep this between you and I for a while. And his response was, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's keep this between us till you have this thing licked. And I was like, Dad, this is something I'm going to live with for the rest of my life. I don't lick this thing. Like it is the rest of my life, I will have to take care of and manage this aspect of you don't just all of a sudden. And so I still go to meetings. I go usually one meeting a week, not a ton, but I look at it as like if I was a diabetic with insulin, I take my insulin. It's just kind of an insurance policy. I go, I stay connected to that community. I offer to help other people that are struggling, and I still work with my sponsor, and it just keeps me humble. It keeps me connected. And it, every time I go, it's just I see, I don't know why I'm getting teary, but just people's lives who seemed like they were never going to find the other side. Like they're walking miracles. And it's like, how are you here knowing what I know about where you've been? And it's beautiful. It's a gift to be able to, in my view, to go into those meetings and see the recovery that I see happening with people.
For sure. And what is that metaphor that they use that your drinking problem is doing push-ups during your sobriety.
Yeah, it's out in the parking lot doing push-ups.
It's in the parking lot doing push-ups. And I remember hearing that, and that was like, wow, it gave me a framework. I've never been to a meeting, as I mentioned to you, but I just connected with someone who was part of this. And I said, you know what? I think our stories overlap a little bit in that I was very contrarian. And I said, you know what? I'm fighting this and everything like that, but I know I've got a problem. And hell, I'm just going to try to do this myself. And for whatever miraculous reason, somehow I was able to make it work. But I still remember that metaphor. It's such a powerful metaphor because it's like you've already got yourself on this hamster wheel. And that if you just go slack, somehow that relapse is going to smash you in the face.
Yeah, that's right. And they're tricky. And there's little red flags I can see where I'm like, hey, I'm romanticizing a drink, or and I had a friend of mine recently, and he was like, do you just think about it every day? And I was like, no, it's very rare that I ever even, it's so rare, but it's scary enough that I'm like, I always know it's there, and it's not I don't think it's an unhealthy fear. It's a healthy acknowledgement that is a part of me. And I've seen enough people in relapse, and I've lost people that I've cared very much about in those rooms to relapse. And they thought they had it, and I'm like, there's just enough in me to say, I'm going to take that medicine and just make sure that I am humbling myself to God, and I am surrendering, and I am, like in a spiritually fit place, so that checking out when life gets hard doesn't appeal to me.
That makes a lot of sense because, again, and that's another thing that it's a major theme, is that it's not good enough to just quit drinking, but then replace it with, some other substance, right? Or some other behavior. And now we have so many other threats. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, video games, there are ways that dopamine hits can come in surreptitious, furtive ways that we're not fully aware of. Or overeating.
Shopping.
But with the book, I do hope there's, and I'm sure just how much I enjoyed talking with you today. When we finally get our hands on the book, whenever that is, I anticipate there will be, peppered in there a few of these war stories, because I do think it is therapeutic sometimes. I can't help, talking to some friends about some of them, because you look back and you have to remind yourself how insane some of this stuff was.
That's right. And they are in there because I didn't want someone to read this and say, I don't see myself in her. Exactly. They needed to read about me waking up in my vomit after a blackout, because then they go, oh yeah. Okay. The things that I hid from the rest of the world, I think for someone who's quite, they will relate to that. And that, that's your starting point. You have to relate to, I do remember going in to a couple meetings, and I kept listening to, and I'm like, well, I didn't drink warm vodka out of a, there were so many differences to our stories, but the similarities were overwhelming. And the thing I thought, I just really at one point thought, there's something fundamentally wrong with me. I'm crazy. Like, I can't not drink. And I've got this compulsion, and it's just, it's insanity. And then when I would hear all these same people doing the same, I was like, oh, this is just what alcoholics do who are trying to control their drinking. I am a garden variety alcoholic. I am not unique, and I'm not crazy. I just have this condition that when I put alcohol in my system, I won't stop. And I have not learned any other coping skills because I started at 15. So I've just got to figure this out, but it was so comforting once I realized, oh, I'm everyone here was doing this. I just hit it better than a lot of people. Yeah.
I think, is it hereditary? Are they, how are we supposed to think of it as is it a disease, alcoholism? What are your thoughts on this?
It's a good question. I used to struggle with it all the time. I think about it less now. I do think it's hereditary. And there is evidence the sooner you start drinking, like, maybe you carry the gene, but it's not activated. But if people wait until they're, I think it's 21, I may have that number wrong, but I think like they're less likely to develop alcoholism. But if you start at like 15, you're more likely to develop, like age really does matter of when you start.
Yeah.
But when I finally told my dad, and that's a story in the book of itself, which was a miraculous, like hearing a voice telling me to tell him when I was adamant he never needed to know. He shared with me something I had no idea of. And he was like, your grandfather was an alcoholic and was in AA. And I was like, what? And this was just a piece of my history I had no idea about. And he's like, oh yeah. And my father was so wonderfully supportive once he found out. He was like, he said that's the hardest thing he's ever had to do. And he, and he just, and it was just beautiful. And I had no idea. Both my mother's parents were probably also alcoholics. And my mother's father, on his deathbed, I was talking to him about his life. And I said, is there anything you would go back and change? And he said, I wish I would have drank less and spent more time with my family. And this was years before I quit, but it stuck with me, And so every time I would drink, and I did not have kids yet. I got sober before I met my husband, before I had children. But that always was like, like this, I don't want to be on my deathbed going, I wish I would have drank less. That really, so I had, and my uncle was an alcoholic. Like I have it all down both sides of my family. So I think it's also why I talk to my kids about addiction and very open with them. They know my past. They know what my book's about. And we have discussed about, giving them the option of not drinking and hopefully forestalling it. Like even, like maybe we'll buy your car if you don't have a drink until after high school. Just hearing the evidence of the longer you wait until your first drink, the less likelihood that gene activates has made me think a lot about how we're going to handle alcohol with our children. And my husband and I have already been discussing that, and they're only 9 and 11, but just the way we talk to them about it, the way they think about it, and thinking about that, because maybe one of them will develop it, maybe one of them won't, but it's not a condition I would wish on anyone, as you know.
That is so interesting about this time frame to look at it, like the urgency of acting in those teenage years, right? I mean, the difference between 15 and 16 versus 17 and 18 versus waiting all the way to your 19 and 20. That flies in the face of a lot of conventional wisdom that I was brought up on, which was, which is more similar to the French sort of thing, which is, my parents were always some wine at dinner. There's always this, my dad, loved a scotch, and it was sort of, you can have a shandy, you could, just water it down a little bit with something. And you can try it at even 12 or 13, so I started drinking shandy when I probably by 13 or 14. And when you frame it that way, I'm like, I mean, geez, what that's like parental malpractice.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. There is this, and there is a line of, if you keep kids away from, but I think if you explain to them all of it, and I think I trust my kids a lot about, I mean, they're smart kids. And if you're honest with them and like, hey, here's what the research says, and here's why we would like for you to wait, because what I don't want them to feel is this rebellion about it. Right. Like, so there's that too, of giving them some say-so in it maybe, and just kind of seeing, and we're still figuring that out, but I do find the research fascinating. And my husband and I, because he does drink and does not have a problem with it. But he has alcoholism all in his family line too. But like one of the ways his father's passed away now, but they would bond by having a drink. And I said, I want you to think about the way you're showing up and drinking in front of our children and the messages you're sending them. And perhaps on his 18th birthday, y'all don't celebrate it with a beer together, like rethinking the rituals that we want to instill and the ways we bond together that don't involve alcohol. And so they don't connect these great core memories with their parent with alcohol.
That's so key, because in my case, I was brought up in that. I just took it as gospel that you never toast with water. That's just, you just
It's
don't
rude.
do that. It's rude. It's rude. You are not allowed to say cheers unless you have some ethanol in that glass. End of story.
Yeah.
And again, where does that come from? That's, I think indigenous peoples would be looking at that and thinking that's absolutely mad. Like, this is like some crazy industrial made thing. You put in this thing, it gives you this toxicological effect. And it's like this worship of this thing. It's very bizarre, when you look at it from a different view.
Our drinking culture is very bizarre, and it is, I didn't know anyone who didn't drink every night. So that was the other thing where I was trying
Nor
to
did I.
problem. But everyone drinks. Like, I don't know anyone who does. Like, only Baptists don't drink, and they're weird. Like, it was either you were just like a fundamentalist and it was some religious thing.
Or the Shakers didn't copulate.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, yeah. That was another sect.
Yeah. So it was just this very strange. But yes, it's and it's interesting too. Like beer commercials, they showed this highlight of people like looking very sober, cheersing. You never see them looking drunk ever. Yeah, I could go on and on about the drinking culture and how much it's shoved down our throat, and I did not realize it until I realized it, and then I was like, it's everywhere, and it's so much baked into our rituals and our, and I think perhaps way back when you would have wine to celebrate a wedding, or you would have wine, but it was just like this for special occasions and maybe a glass. But now it's so easily accessible and it's become part of everyday life. And that's just a dangerous recipe, I think, for disaster, because it creates dependence quickly. I think we have more and more people that are developed. I've had so many people call me that say, hey, I've noticed you don't drink. Can I talk to you? And I would have had no clue they were struggling. And they're just like, I've realized that I can't not have a couple every night, and I don't know what to do. It's, it just becomes this habit. And next thing you know, you need that relief. And
that's the test, isn't it? Do you have to take it or can you leave it?
Yeah.
And if we're really honest, I think I performed that test on myself and I failed, because I could do behavior that you were talking about, sort of lock yourself in a room and do this, but it's not a sustainable behavior. Mentally, I'm not ready to break with it yet. Right. And yeah, you tie my hands behind my back. Okay. I can't imbibe, but you're not breaking that desire. You're not breaking the behavioral environment that is driving me to that pint.
Yeah. I remember the first time, it was probably 8 months in, I had a friend of mine and she said, hey, I've got a friend's birthday, and she was sober, and she was like, and it's at a bar, and I feel like I need to go to wish her a happy birthday, but I don't want to go alone. Could you go with me?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, sure. And so we went, and I remember walking in and just being like, this is what I thought was fun. Like, this is what I thought, like, it was all smoky and like everybody was yelling over each other and nobody was listening. And then the people at the bar just looked pathetic and, like they were just downing their drinks, not even talking to anyone. And I was like, everybody here is looking for connection. And they're like in this bubble of it. Like it, I was like, I thought this was where the good times roll. And it was the darkest, heaviest. And I don't think all bars are like that, but this one was. And I just was like, I can't believe this was what I thought was the pinnacle of, like, this is just all I wanted, was to be able to come to this bar and have a drink, and it just, once I got away from it and opened up and found real connection and real community with people, and also realized what a depressant it is. I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was fanning the flames of my anxiety. I didn't understand how it worked, and that it was like taking my self-esteem and any sense of self-worth. And I just, you don't know till, and it's all I knew since I was 15. So it's who I thought I was. I thought when I was drinking, I'm just kind of a pessimistic, mildly depressed person. Like that is just and that's just something I'm going to have to live with. And when I finally, several months after sobriety, kind of started working through and dealing with things, I realized, oh no, that's just me when I'm drinking. Like when I'm living a life of drinking, I was happy when I drank, but the rest of the time I was pretty depressed and felt hollow on the inside and disconnected from my soul. And that is actually not me thriving. That's me living a life when I'm drinking. But I didn't know that wasn't who I was, which was just nuts.
Which is nuts. It is totally nuts. This is a great preview for the upcoming book.
Thanks.
When should we expect it to come out?
Great question. I don't know. I have an editor that is going to look at it. Then I'm going to shop agents. And then if I cannot find an agent, I'll look into self-publishing. So I don't know right now. But I do want it to come out. I feel good about it. I feel good about what I have in there, and that I think it will help people see themselves or understand their family members. But I can't answer when. There's a couple steps, and a couple of it is depending on outside forces as to what can happen.
For sure. Well, how can people find you? We've mentioned the Substack. Are you on IG, TikTok?
I do have a TikTok, but I really am not active on there. I think I've posted a couple videos of my family. Like it's really Substack. I'm, as I've said, trying to limit my online activity. I do have an Instagram, but it's more private. Just pictures of my family, and for my public face, it's usually just Substack.
That's the place. That's the place where listeners can find Priscilla Harvey living the questions. Again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, so many great anecdotes, giving us a bit of sort of scriptural analysis, talking about, we talked a little bit about politics, which is good because the last couple episodes I've done have just been really heavy, and I much prefer this type of conversation where we can talk individual to individual, talk about different themes. And you've brought such a textural point of view, and one that is just, it's so relevant, because I can't disagree with you that there's so many things like going wrong in the world all at once. And I really enjoy reading your stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative. This has been an absolute pleasure for me. And I look forward to continuing to check each other's work out.
Definitely. And at some point, it is a long way away, but at some point, if you ever do come to Australia, come visit us at the vanilla plantation.
I would love that. If I am in Australia, I will come find you.
All right.